I'd like to thank all of you for coming out. Uhuru Solidarity movement that has assumed the responsibility for organizing African People's Solidarity Day is really important and I believe heroic, courageous kind of organization. Doesn't mean that everybody in the organization is courageous, but it does, as an organization, I think it's extraordinary because it obviously goes against the grain of everything that America is about, everything that we've been told, and especially in the North American or white community, everything that your mama told you has been something different from what the Uhuru Solidarity Movement and African People's Solidarity Committee are about. I am the chair of the African Socialist International, which is an international organization, and the African People's Socialist Party USA is one of the organizations, one manifestation of this international organization. We are the U.S. front of the African Revolution. And I'm sure that you noticed that this day, this event, is not called African American Solidarity Day. This is African People's Solidarity Day, not African American People's Solidarity Day. And in every reference that you heard from Comrade Penny Hess's presentation was about Africans in this country. And that is because African people constitute a single nation that's been separated, dispersed around the world. That we are one nation, and that the African People's Socialist Party, USA, is a part of an international organization that has as its primary objective the liberation and unification of Africa and African people worldwide. Now, obviously, the view that I've just put forth is not the view of most of the Africans or black people, so-called black people that you may have heard. Barack Hussein Obama obviously has a different view, and so does Michael Nutter have a different view, and so do many other people whose understanding is essentially informed by the ruling class in this country. And the truth is that ours at this point is a minority view. It's a minority view essentially because we don't have access to, at this point, to the kind of institutions of information dispersal that the ruling elite has. But as a small organization, I can tell you that what we're about is actually concretely struggling to build and make the liberation and unification of African people worldwide a reality. We are a small organization, but we not only do we exist here in the United States, we exist and do work, actual practical work in Canada. We exist and do actual practical work in the Bahamas. We exist and do practical work in Colombia, in South America. We exist and do practical work in West Africa and in East Africa. We exist and do practical work in England, in Belgium, in Germany, and on tomorrow we'll be consolidating the African People's Socialist Party in France. So it's a real organization that has as its objective, has chosen the objective for the liberation and unification of Africa and African people worldwide. We've organized various entities that contribute to this. We organized in 1982 the African National Reparations Organization that after having held in this country the first World Tribunal on Reparations for African people in this country. We organize, we are essentially, we bear a lot of the responsibility for the fact that at Durban, South Africa in 2001, the determination at the United Nations sponsored meeting was that African people are due reparations, that is a part of a consequence of the work that we've done in this world. We held for 12 consecutive years tribunals throughout this country, including one right here in the city of Philadelphia, where testimony and evidence was presented to show the justness of the demand for reparations for African people in this country. We organized the All African Peoples Development Empowerment Project that does concrete work. Particularly right now we are in Sierra Leone, where we've built rainwater harvesting programs that brought clean water to people on the continent in that area who had never seen clean water, and who, as a consequence, so many of our children die early with waterborne disease. We are in the process now of building a clinic to provide maternal and infant care to impact on the maternal infant mortality rate in Sierra Leone. We organize, as you know, the International People's Democratic Uhuru Movement that is chaired by Comrade Diop Olubao. We engaged in an incredible campaign for the mayor of this city that ended on the 8th. The election that happened on the 8th of this month. We organized the African People's Solidarity Committee, that is the parent organization of the Uhuru Solidarity Movement. And all of these and others that I did not mention, entities that we created to forward the struggle of African people, to advance and enhance our position, to win the liberation and unification of Africa and African people worldwide. It is a part of a national liberation movement. It is not some attempt to make America a better place. We don't believe that it's possible for America to be a better place. The fact is that this entity that we refer to now, as America came into being, as a consequence of a terrible attack on the indigenous peoples here who live, the existing remainders of whom live in concentration camps that are known as reservations, and that the political economy here, as well as throughout the world, was created through the enslavement of African people. That was the origin of the rise of the political economy that we're talking about. That before there was a Wall Street, that capital was consolidating itself as a consequence of an attack on black people, as an attack on other peoples around the world. And this is an objective reality. That I'm saying this, but you don't even have to believe it. You can leave here in a hurry if you like. You can Google it. You can go to your nearest library and you'll find out that this is an objective truth. And I'm mentioning this because I think that it is important, because people get born into situations that they give the impression of having always been like this. So we've got some people on this cold night who will be occupying Philadelphia and occupying Wall Street and various other things. And they were given political birth just recently, politically. And they, as I said, got born into a situation that gives the impression of having always been like this, but it hasn't always been like this. And I'm going to say some things about that, and I say it often because I think it's really important for us to understand that political, social, economic phenomenon that we experience, they have a history. And it's important to understand the history of this phenomenon if we are really going to understand the phenomenon itself and what its implications are for all of us in this world. What we are concerned about is understanding our place and destiny in the world that we live in, and from some scientific perspective, as opposed to some fanciful thing that we might have learned in school. Obviously, the worst kind of pablum. I wish I could call it pablum. Pablum is just bland and tasteless. But what we're taught in school is worse than that. It's not simply bland and tasteless poisons at the same time. And reality is that in the process of doing this, we have to destroy certain kinds of myths that people have lived with for a long period of time. And not the least of these myths is this assumption of some superiority or supremacy of white people. Not the least of this is an explanation of the world that we live in that suggests or hints that the immiseration of the vast majority of the people on this earth. What we're talking about 80% of the people on this earth living off $10 US a day. And what is the explanation for this? And the explanation that all of us have been given is that there is some moral or some other deficit that most of the world suffers from that make it necessary for us to live in poverty and misery as compared to white people who have not only are they moral but have a surplus of intellect and morality. That is what gets taught. Doesn't just get taught in Philadelphia. Doesn't just get taught in the white communities in Philadelphia. It gets taught in the African communities in Philadelphia. It gets taught in Nigeria. It gets taught all over the world where imperialism prevails. And that's throughout the world. But the truth is that when you look at human civilization, you look at the magnificent civilization that existed in places like China and India and Africa. You look at the fact that African people created a magnificent civilization. We were building pyramids before Europe mastered fire. That's just an objective reality. Before white people understood where fire came from, we were building magnificent civilizations, and they exist today. Evidence of them exists today. Throughout the Americas, you can find them. Throughout, in various parts of Africa, you can find them. In various parts of Asia, you can find this. This is just an objective truth. And it's necessary to say this because part of what we have to go against is the ideology of imperialism. But people refer to as racism, which is simply the ideological underpinning of a social system that was born of slavery and genocide. And this is an explanation that it offers itself and the rest of the world of why everything is so much better off for white people than it is for the rest of us. This genius, this inherent genius, this relationship perhaps with God or something else is the basis for that. When reality is quite different from that, isn't it? Isn't it different from that? Yes. We know it's different from that, and deep down in his heart or her heart, every white person on earth knows that's not true. Because they look in the mirror every damn day, and what stares back is not genius, and not some surplus of morality or intellect. You know what stares back, it's Dick and Jane. and so the truth is that we're talking about people who lived with civilization that had warts and problems, but they were civilizations when you compare it to what was existing in Europe. And all you got to do is go to any museum that goes back for centuries and then look at where Europe was as compared to where Egypt was. They look at where Europe was as compared to where the Mayans were, or the Olmecs were in the Americas, or China and the rest of that. And it disproves that. But the reality is that if you just take the years, and I mention this often, so much that anybody who's heard me speak may have heard me talk about just in the 4 short years, because this is a critical point in history. Half the white people on the planet Earth died. At least half died of plague. All over Europe, this was what we now refer to as Europe. This is what happened. And for at least another 100 years or more, we had that and other plagues that continued to impact on the population of Europe, decimating the population. Even the Pope found himself having to question whether or not this special relationship that he had with God was going to be helpful. In fact, he got the hell out of the Vatican and tried to find some rural area where nobody else was there so that he could survive the plague that was killing not only people, animals, what have you, even resulted in different sects of Christianity being born from that. This horrible plague that Europeans concluded must have come as a consequence of God being angry with them for something. And so you had situations where hundreds and sometimes thousands of Christians would march throughout Europe engaging in self-flagellation, beating themselves bloody with whips and things like that to preempt God, to punish themselves so that God wouldn't have to do it. So the plague was an incredibly significant event in the history of Europe. And I mention this because in just the 3 years between 1347 and 1351, 4 years, half the white people died. And what that suggests, among other things, is that you cannot have a viable economy if half the population dies in 4 years. It's impossible to have a viable economy if half the population dies in 4 years. I didn't say half the population of Europe died during the period of the plague. I said in 4 years. Between 1347 and 1351, half died. But the plague lasted, and either that or various other plagues which came in its wake in rapid succession for more than 100 years. So this was bedeviling Europe, undermining Europe. The whole notion of some kind of wealth and political economy of significance is shattered by that understanding. But what we now know is Europe did rescue itself from this situation. When we met Europeans, Africans, and the people, other people who lived in the Americas and Asians and what have you, when we met Europeans, Europeans had no freedom, no resources, not even health. When we met Europeans, they lived during an era of feudalism. You know that, feudalism, where the nobility owned the land, and even though the serfs who lived on the land were not owned themselves, it was the next closest thing to slavery. If the nobility sold the land, they went with the land. That's where the concept of the landlord comes from. The lords own the land. And part of what the serfs were created on the land, they could keep for themselves, but the majority went to the nobility. That's where the myth of Robin Hood comes from. Because all they did was pay taxes and give up everything they had to the nobility. That's who kept the king fat. That's who kept those who lived in the castle and behind the walls of the castle living all right. At their expense. That was the primary contradiction that existed in Europe at this time. That's what we were talking about. When we met Europeans, this is the system that they lived under. And I think that should be understood. These were no free, noble people who sailed the seas, who were motivated by some intellectual itch that had to be scratched by seeing what was on the other side of the horizon. And these were people who were driven out of Europe by poverty and despair. And what they did, of course, and you find evidence of it. That let me go, queen, so I can come and get the wealth, the gold, and all this that's on the other side of the horizon. And of course, there's the story of looking for spices, which is a hell of a thing, isn't it? I mean, if that's not a statement of poverty, I don't know what the hell is. We were looking for spices. Let's get 4 or 5 ships and cross the ocean to get some nutmeg. All right? This is the Europe that we are talking about. This was not even Europe. Because up until the 17th century, there was not this thing that commonly referred to as Europe didn't exist. It was this territory of warring tribes of people, always at each other's throats. When we're talking about a period where people who lived in this area identified and defined themselves primarily in relationship to each other. The Celts, the Saxons, the Gauls, and what have you, primarily in relationship to each other is how they define themselves. It was only as a consequence and through slavery and colonialism, it was the slave trade primarily, that created a situation where they began to primarily define themselves in relationship to us and everybody else. Slavery gave rise to the advent of the white man. It was slavery that created Europe and the European. It was colonialism that created Europe and the European. It was slavery and colonialism that created the sense of sameness among white people around the world that rested on a foundation of a parasitic political economy that was sucking the resources and blood from everybody else. This sense of sameness that rested on this material base is what people refer to as nations. It was slavery, colonialism, this sense of sameness, whiteness, and Christianity. And Christianity that was the basis of what we now refer to as the European nation. That's where it came from. But the process of creating this entity, this sense of sameness, was an attack on peoples around the world. When Europeans came to the Americas, there were no borders here. There were no borders. When Europeans came to Africa, there were no borders in Africa. In fact, the borders that we are talking about are nothing but property lines that were created by Europe. In 1884 and 85, this momentous time in history, in Berlin, Germany, a conference was held where European powers got together and carved up the continent of Africa into these untenable entities that people refer to as countries and nations today. Nigeria, this place they call Ghana, the place they call Sudan, the place they call Somalia. These were created by Europeans. They were created in part to prevent Europeans from fighting among themselves over the land, these resources in Africa that they had been sucking up already for a couple of hundred years. They sat down just like mafioso and divided up. This is to the Germans, this is to the British, etc., etc., etc. That's how it happened. And as a consequence of that, we now have people who refer to themselves as Ghanaians, as Somalians, as Nigerians, as Jamaicans, as Nassauians, or Bahamians, as African Americans, and that's the newest, kindest thing that we've been referred to. And we have this thing where this group of warring tribes now as Europeans. So we have the consolidation of Europe that comes into existence at the expense of the consolidation of the solidarity of all these other peoples. You have the rise of the European nation that sucks the resources from other peoples around the world and requires them to be disunited in order to make that successful. That's what you're looking at when you look at what's happening in Afghanistan. The people there are struggling to liberate their nation from an imperialism that has sucked its blood. The people in Iraq are doing the same thing. The people in Palestine are doing the same thing. They're struggling to liberate their nation from what has been imposed on them as a condition for giving rise to and sustaining this thing that we could refer to as Europe. When I say Europe, I don't mean just on that territory. I'm talking about what we will find in places like Canada and Australia, etc. And here in this country. We got the consolidation of what we call the part of the European nation is the America, in America, as it's referred to. I mean, this is a place where the traditional indigenous peoples are in concentration camps. They're in concentration camps. What the hell are we talking about, the 99%? Huh? What are we talking about? They're in concentration camps where someplace there's not even electricity or running water. I know, I've been there. That's an objective reality. People want to be free. And it is upon this basis that the political economy that we refer to as capitalism was born from this experience. We talk about Wall Street. We're talking about, where does it get its name from? It gets its name from this wall that was built by enslaved African people in New York. That it was built to protect the white people from the Indians from whom the land was stolen. The entire political economy, capitalism, articulates itself through the suppression of the rights and resources of the peoples around the world. That's what we're looking at. So now there is crisis, because when we met Europeans, not free, not healthy, right? No resources. Now everybody else is unfree and unhealthy and have no resources, and Europeans got all the damn resources, all the health and all the freedom. So if there is a problem today where Wall Street, it's impossible for people to get their retirement funds, like in Greece and here. Greeks are up in an uproar, tearing it up. And I said, right on. In an uproar. Here, they ain't tearing up too much. In an uproar. But the basis of the uproar is the fact that in Iraq and in Afghanistan and peoples around the world are taking back their resources so that the economy can't do for the Europeans what it used to be able to do in the past. And this is what is critical for us to understand. Because people like to talk about the booms and the busts, the cyclical booms and busts of capitalism. And it's true. You can look at the past and you see that there are these busts. Everything goes to pot. And how does capitalism rescue itself in the past? It does it by wringing out more resources from the colonized peoples of the world. It makes a war. It does something to wring out more resources from the colonized peoples of the world. But today, that's what George W. Bush was trying to do. That's what Iraq was all about from the Bush standpoint. But instead, what they did was inflame the passions not only for people in Iraq, but all around the world. Some people said that Bush did more for an international revolution than Che Guevara did. It inflamed the imagination and passion of people around the world who wanted their freedom back and fought for it, and are fighting for it even right now. So Bush couldn't do it. Nobody can do it. That's what Evo Morales is about in Bolivia. That's what it's about. People taking back their resources. That's why they hate the guts of Hugo Chavez. That's why they slander people around the world who've taken back their resources, whether it's in Libya or whether it's in Iran. You know the history of Iran. Yes, sir. You know the United States government overthrew the elected leader of Iran in 1954-55, Mohammad Mossadegh, and replaced him with the Shah of Iran. Now you know that it was because of the oil corporations that the United States did this. And now they act like they don't understand why Iranians might have some problems with them. And the Shah was such a despot that people who lived in this country, Iranians who were here studying, when they were demonstrating against the Shah, they had to wear paper sacks over their heads so that Savak, the intelligence organization of the Shah, would not be able to identify them and kill and torture their families that were back in Iran. People want their freedom. People want their resources. People want their sovereignty. And people want their nations back for themselves. They say, it's my nation and I want it back. And African people, just like everybody else, when we didn't pop up in this country in Mississippi, someplace on a colored green leaf, we didn't get here because 400 years ago, one of the seers decided that they're going to need some basketball players in the NBA 400 years hence. Let's get a jump on it and get somebody over there in a hurry. We got here as a consequence of having been kidnapped, a war that was made on Africa. On Africa, that resulted in our being here. And now it has brought us here in a state of the worst kind of poverty. We don't act like, you talk about 99%, where? Hell, when did it happen? Because since we've been here, since we met Europeans, we've been living in the worst kind of misery and poverty. We've been fighting like hell forever. 500 years, even before we got here. People fought on ships bringing us here. People fought on the continent of Africa. People fought in Mississippi and right here in Philadelphia, been fighting and fighting today. The U.S. imperialism has no legitimacy. The United States government has no legitimacy when it comes to African people who've been trapped as a nation of people without any rights at all. So ours is a struggle for national liberation. We want to be a free nation of people. I don't give a damn about your hyphens. I don't want to be an African American. You can't be an African and American at the same time. That's a contradiction in terms. That's like calling somebody a slave and a slave master. You one or the other. America built itself at the expense of Africa. And the truth of the matter is, we're seeing a terrible crisis. And you make a mistake when you can think of this crisis purely in economic terms. Economics is an aspect of it. But it's not purely in economic terms when you look at this crisis. You look at this crisis, you see the fracturing, the clear fracturing of this thing that they call America today. They like to refer to America as this, how do they call it, this nation of immigrants, which is incredible for a number of reasons. In the first place, Africans are not immigrants. We're captives. We didn't get here for no damn immigration, no green card. We captives. Somebody came and captured us and brought us here. And the notion that somehow we're free because somebody signed a 13th Amendment to the Constitutional Emancipation Proclamation. How the hell can somebody who owns you like property one day, then the next day say, okay, you're free, and now you're an American citizen? How the hell could I be free if the one who enslaved me now decides I'm an American citizen? There was no vote taken. Wasn't no question asked. Do you want to be an American citizen? Do you want to be free? Do you want to have access to your resources in Africa or any place else? They just said you're an American citizen. Anybody with the power to do that had the power to do it to somebody who was not free. Yes. So the struggle is for national liberation. That's what we're fighting for. We're talking about, when we're talking about national liberation, we're talking about also recognition that if you look at this country, I've been reading interesting books. You may have read Samuel Huntington's. I think he was Harvard professor. Wasn't he Harvard? Who wrote the book about the, how did he characterize it, the clash of civilizations. Was he Harvard or Yale? I think he was Harvard. And I think the book opens with an observation that during this demonstration in San Diego, that you had all these people marching in San Diego, and they were not carrying the American flags, they were carrying the Mexican flags. But damn it, they're Mexicans. And people want to forget that. Because they try to forget that in recent memory, half of Mexico was stolen. California, Texas, Utah, Arizona, New Mexico, Colorado, just recently stolen. And then they draw an artificial border there and say now anybody come across this border is illegal. And it's something. That's what state power is. State power means that whoever has it defines what is legal and what is illegal. Like, I am captured and brought here, and then slavery becomes legal. My getting away and running away breaks the law. And then the people whose land was stolen from them, the Mexicans, a border is drawn there, and if they come across, they are illegal aliens. But the fact is, they carry the Mexican flag. And more you see that, and more you see that the people are demanding their freedom. And they're upset because there are mosques all over this country and throughout Europe where people are saying prayers, and among other things, they're saying them in Arabic, they're praying to the east, and they have not succumbed to the basic principles of European civilization. They don't act like Europeans. They don't say that their loyalty is not to the Pope. Their loyalty is not to the Christian church. Their loyalty is not to the European countries they live in. They don't understand why an African child born here, whose parents were born in Somalia, that they can easily trick that child into joining a military force that wants to go back to Somalia to fight against those who are oppressing them there. They got a problem. Because what they've called this nation, this sham that they've called a nation, is clearly fracturing. And oppressed peoples are struggling everywhere to try to win back our freedom and identifying where our real national interests are. And that is the reality that we're looking at. So this is really important. We want people to be able to unite with African people's struggle for national liberation. And this is different from an NAACP type event. This is different from an event that does a lot to make white people feel good, because it's based on some kind of, I just want to integrate with you kind of politics. I mean, think about it. I mean, that must be some ego-building thing. See all these people who've been oppressed? We showed, I don't know if it was shown on that PowerPoint, when they captured Gaddafi, and they actually rammed a knife up his rectum. So, oh, how horrible that was. But this is America that we're talking about. This is the America that literally captured African people in this country. And even as they were alive, cut off their genitals and forced them to eat it. This is the America that we're talking about. So what they did in Libya was child's play compared to what they've done to African people in this country. Right. This is the America that we are supposed to have. And it's not just that it happened. It's not just that it's happened. Nobody's even said, okay, I'm sorry, apologize, can we be friends? That hasn't even happened.
First time I heard it.
So this is the America that we're talking about. And we want to be free. We want to be a free people. And there's been this really, kind of ego-feeding movement. People talk about immigration. I just want to live with you. I just want to go to school with you. I just want to, I just really, really, really want to be your friend kind of movement. And friendship can't happen on those terms. Can't happen on those terms. Friendship requires the emancipation of the slave. For a long time, the relatives, descendants of and patriots in this country denied that Thomas Jefferson made babies with Sally Hemings, who was an enslaved child. She was 13 years old. Had 4 or 5 babies from Jefferson. And so when it became irrefutable, they did the DNA test and everything else, then they began to refer to it as an affair. They had an affair. But a slave can't have an affair with a slave master. It can. It's not like she can say, not tonight, honey, I got a headache. You know? It doesn't work that way. It's impossible for a slave to have an honest, a decent relationship with a slave master. It's difficult for the oppressed and the oppressor to engage like in that kind of relationship. Because there's social power. We talk about social wealth. What do I mean social power? I mean the fact that if I walk in the white community, could be a middle class community, could even be a working class community. It's possible for somebody to get on the phone, right, and say there's a strange Negro walking through this community, and the police going to be there in a minute, in a jiffy, that's going to be the reality. So you don't have to be a Rockefeller, do you? You don't have to be the upper class anything. There's that social power. And we carry it with us everywhere we go. We carry social powerlessness with us where we go, so that I can go into a department store and be dissatisfied with this 19-year-old clerk who's behind the counter, who comes to certain kinds of assumptions because I'm an African, and about what I'm trying to purchase. I'm trying to give her this money, my money, you know, and she can be insulting and rude, and if I raise my voice, security, social power, that's what I'm talking about, and social powerlessness. And it doesn't matter that I might have resources at my command. You see, I mean, that's the way this thing works. And there's social wealth. That's right. So when you talk about the 1% maybe having the majority of it, but there's social wealth in the white community. I mean, I'm not just talking about the social wealth that allows too often for a child who graduates to automatically get the trip to Europe or whatever else that happens there. That's part of it, but I'm talking about that circulates in various communities. That makes there a greater likelihood that you can get a job because of a cousin or somebody that looks like you, or you remind me of my cousin or my grandmother or something else like that, you know. It's that kind of social wealth that's at work as compared to social poverty. Social wealth, that means there's a greater likelihood that a school, a quality school, is going to be in your community than in my community. Social wealth, that means that there's a greater likelihood that there's even going to be a supermarket for you to take your money to. That's right. In your community than in my community. I'm not just talking about, you know, the fact that you got more money, and as we, you know, if you can believe in any of the data that was shown here, you know, 20 times more. I'm talking about how it articulates itself in other ways. And also, we can't just be hung up on pure economics, purely the economic factor. Because when we talk about the power of Wall Street, the power of capital, we're talking about how it deploys armies, military forces throughout the world. You just can be hung up by some abstract question of the banks and the Wall Street, but the armies that's attacking Libya, the police that attack my community. That is the power. That's a Wall Street army and Wall Street police and a Wall Street mayor and a Wall Street president that we're having to contend with all the damn time. We've always had to contend with it, even when it looked like the 401ks were going to last forever. Even when it looked like the bubble was going to continue to expand and resources were going to be, the good old days were never going to go away. That was the experience of Africans and most people around the world. So we salute any movement that attacks that relationship. But we are also aware that we've done this before, and it hasn't been to our benefit. When I say we've done it before, I mean even the big one in 1776. Remember that? How people declared that they were oppressed by England, wrote incredibly democratic treatises on that. You know? What is it? We hold these truths to be. Was that, what was the, and then there's the Declaration of Independence, right? And they fought against England and everything, even while slavery happened here. Even while there was slavery here. Even while the Indians were still catching hell and being pushed into reservations, their land and resources being stolen. That's the reality. So what we're saying is that there's a tremendous amount of wealth that has been built on the base of slavery and colonialism. And that we have an objective, those of us who truly believe in freedom, have an objective to tear the entire damn thing down as opposed to trying to fix it. And there can be a fix-it quality to a movement to occupy Wall Street just to get back what, quote-unquote, we used to have before the bubble burst. Because the damn bubble burst for us a long time ago. And that's something that we really people need to be aware of. And that's why I really appreciate being able to do African People Solidarity Day, and I know that we're talking to a very small and narrow base of people, but that's all right, because there are a lot of people who are in motion right now, but they ain't gonna be in motion 2 weeks, 2 years, 4 years from now, and sometimes they brag about not having an organization. Our objective is to build an organization that we can take our freedom. We hope that the occupation movement can contribute to the efforts being made by peoples around the world to take our freedom back. We hope that's the case, but we won't depend on it. Right. We build a movement that can take our freedom, and we hope that in the process of so doing, we don't have to fight against the occupation. Because there is occupation that happens that a lot of people don't like. That's what they're fighting against in Iraq and Afghanistan and Palestine and various other places around the world. We were fighting against occupation. And a new occupation won't help it. We're hoping that people who are involved today, whose passions have been awakened by this crisis of imperialism, will be able to see through the fantasies that have been fed us for all these years, and be able to see that if they're interested in truly building a new world, that they have allies who have a lot of experience, been doing it, struggling for a very long time, and that they would do well to try to find a way to unite with some historical movements to overturn this relationship that we have with Wall Street and capitalism altogether.